You're kidding me. You're the guy? Victoria Langford's voice rang out across the garden cafe like a slap. Heads turned, conversation stilled. Even the soft jazz playing near the fountain seemed to hush itself. Malcolm Reed remained seated at the small wrought iron table beneath the umbrella, wearing a crisp but unassuming security guard's uniform. He didn't flinch. He simply looked up, calm and steady, and answered, "My company collapsed 2 weeks ago. But I gave my word, so I showed up." Victoria laughed, sharp, cold, disbelieving. "You expect me to believe that? That a security guard is my blind date? The agency said you were stable, established, potential." "I was all of those things," Malcolm said. "Now I'm starting over." Victoria turned in a slow circle, as if looking for hidden cameras. "This has to be a joke. Is this some kind of lesson? A twisted experiment to test me?" "No," Malcolm said quietly. "Just honesty." She stepped back, her heels grinding against the stone path. "You've got nerve. I'll give you that. But if I wanted charity, I'd sponsor a food drive. I don't date men who smell like sweat and broken promises." Then with one final glare, she tossed her napkin on the table and walked off, her designer heels clicking in perfect rhythm each step, an exclamation mark of judgment. The cafe fell into stunned silence. A couple near the fountain whispered. A busboy froze mid-pour. A child stared open-mouthed. Emily William had been standing nearby with a tray of clean glasses. She had seen the whole thing. As Victoria disappeared into the lobby, Emily set the tray down slowly and stepped toward the man still sitting alone, his back straight, his eyes quiet. "Sir," she said gently. "Are you all right?" Malcolm looked up, her voice wasn't pitying. It was soft, sincere, like a breeze breaking the heaviness in the air. He nodded once. "I'm used to worse." I'm sorry you had to hear that," Emily said. "That we all did." He gave a faint smile. "At least she didn't throw the water." Emily chuckled. "Give her time." Malcolm looked at her for a moment. Her apron was stained at the hem. Her shoes were worn, but her presence, her kindness, was something he hadn't felt in a very long time. "Would you like a fresh cup of coffee?" she asked. "It's on me. You don't have to." "I know," she said, cutting him off gently. "But I want to." She left for the kitchen and Malcolm watched her, how she still stopped to help an elderly woman adjust her chair, how she refilled a guest's glass before they asked. How she moved like every small act mattered. When she returned, she handed him a steaming cup and sat across from him. Not as a server, not as a stranger, but as someone who wasn't afraid to sit with a man the world had just judged. "I'm Emily," she said. "Malcolm," he replied. "You really lost your business?" she asked carefully. "Yes, and you still showed up. A promise is still a promise." Emily stirred her own coffee, watching him with quiet eyes. "Then I'd say you're already richer than most." For the first time that day, Malcolm laughed. A real, quiet, grateful laugh. And in that moment, while the rest of the garden cafe moved on from the scene, whispered and forgot, the man once called a titan of industry felt something simple, warm, and utterly rare. He felt seen. And if you believe that genuine kindness, like Emily's, can change an entire day or even a life, leave a comment saying, "I still believe in kindness." Or hit the like button for Malcolm if you've ever been judged for how you looked or for a hard moment in your life. Malcolm returned the coffee cup to its saucer, the ceramic clink soft but final. Emily still sat across from him, elbows resting on the edge of the table, eyes half squinted under the morning light. The jazz trio had moved on to a slow, smoky tune, and the hum of the courtyard resumed its gentle buzz. But something had shifted. A kind of quiet tether now hung in the air between them. "I don't think I've ever seen her before," Emily said, nodding toward the direction Victoria had disappeared. "She's new to me, too," Malcolm replied. "Blind date, though I suppose only one of us was truly blind." Emily smiled softly. "She definitely made an impression. Not the kind I'd aim for, but hey." Malcolm tilted his head. "And what kind would you aim for?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she took a sip of her own coffee, bought hastily from the staff lounge before she came out here. I guess I'd want to leave people a little better than I found them. That's something my mom used to say. Kindness doesn't cost much, but not giving it? Well, that can be expensive. He watched her for a long moment. You always talk to strangers like this? She gave a playful shrug. Only the ones who just got humiliated in front of half the hotel. Malcolm laughed. She leaned forward. So, Malcolm, if you don't mind me asking, what kind of company did you run? He hesitated. Tech systems development, enterprise logistics mostly. Her eyebrows lifted. Fancy. It used to be, he said. Until it wasn't. Emily studied him for a moment, then smiled in that steady way that didn't press, didn't pry. I don't know if it means anything, she said gently. But I think showing up today without status, without bravado, that says more than most resumes. He looked down, unsure what to do with the warmth rising in his chest. Why are you being so nice to me? She tilted her head. Because you looked like you needed it. He didn't answer. Not with words. Instead, he let silence fill the gap between honesty and defense. It was something new, and it wasn't unwelcome. Emily stood slowly, brushing crumbs from her apron. I've got to get back inside. Lunch crowd's coming soon. But she paused, pulling a small notepad from her apron and scribbling quickly. If you ever want to not talk about business failures and cafe drama, I know a place with good pie and questionable jukebox selections. She tore the paper free and set it in front of him. He picked it up. You wrote your number on a coffee receipt? I did, she said, smirking. Figured you could handle some humble packaging. She turned and walked away before he could respond. Malcolm sat there for another 10 minutes, not moving, just listening to the city shift around him. People walked past without noticing the man in the uniform. For once, that suited him just fine. Later that day, back in the small apartment he was renting under a fake name on the south side of Charleston, Malcolm sat at the kitchenette table, flipping the receipt over and over in his hand. Emily William, he said aloud to no one. Nora called. You disappeared after the date, she said, voice tight in his ear. Tell me you didn't deck her. I didn't even raise my voice that bad. She left within 5 minutes. Called me broken, pathetic, and a liar. Nora sighed. So, exactly as predicted. Yes, but something happened after she left. He told her about Emily, her gentleness, the coffee, the receipt. Nora didn't interrupt, which was rare for her. When he finished, there was a pause on the line. Do you think she recognized you? Not a chance. She's too grounded to fake that kind of grace. Nora hummed. You think she's worth it? I think, he said slowly, I'd rather find out than spend another night in a mansion full of furniture no one sits on. You're doing it then? I'm doing it. All right, she said. But remember what we talked about. If this becomes real, if she matters, you'll have to tell her everything sooner, not later. I know. And Malcolm. Yeah. I hope she's the one. God knows you deserve to be seen for once. He hung up. The room was quiet, save for the hum of the fridge and the distant bark of a dog. The light was fading outside. On the counter sat the uniform he'd worn earlier that day, folded and still holding the faint scent of coffee and sunlight. Malcolm walked over to the window and looked out across the neighborhood of small homes, rusted mailboxes, children on bikes carving chalk trails across cracked sidewalks. It felt human. It felt real. And for the first time in a long while, he didn't feel like a man pretending to fall. He felt like a man ready to rise. And maybe, just maybe, he wouldn't have to do it alone. The pie place wasn't much to look at. Peeling paint on the sign, one flickering neon letter, and a screen door that squeaked like it hadn't been oiled since the 1980s. But inside, the air smelled like cinnamon, burnt sugar, and hot coffee. And that was enough to keep Malcolm from turning around. Emily was already there, tucked into a corner booth beside the jukebox that warbled out old blues and Motown ballads. She wore a faded denim jacket, her hair pulled back in the same no-nonsense ponytail, but her smile when she saw him, soft, real, easy, cut through any nerves he had brought with him. "You came," she said as he slid into the seat across from her. "I told you. I keep my promises, even one scribbled on a coffee receipt." He smiled. "Especially those." A waitress came by and poured 2 cups without asking. "Y'all want the usual?" she asked Emily. 2 slices of apple. "Heat is up." Emily replied, then nodded toward Malcolm. "First timer." "First timer gets extra whipped cream," the waitress said before she shuffled away. Malcolm looked around. The place was nearly empty. An older man with a newspaper, 2 women in scrubs, and a kid playing with a sugar packet at the counter. No crystal chandeliers, no crisp white linens, just chipped mugs, clinking silverware, and the sound of people being human. "I like this," Malcolm said quietly. "It's not trying to impress anyone." "That's why I come here," Emily replied. "No one's pretending." He nodded slowly, then glanced down at his cup. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "That day at the hotel, after what you saw, why did you come over?" Emily shrugged. "Because you looked like you needed someone, too." "That simple?" "That simple?" She leaned forward. "I know what it's like to be embarrassed in front of people. To be made to feel small. I grew up watching my mom work 2 jobs, get talked down to by customers who didn't know she had 2 degrees and a spine of steel. I guess I don't like bullies, even if they wear designer heels." The pie arrived, steaming and fragrant. Malcolm took a bite and closed his eyes for half a second longer than he meant to. "Good?" Emily asked, grinning. "I think I might cry." She laughed, the sound warm and sudden. "You're allowed. It's medicinal." They talked for an hour, about music, about her job at the hotel, her side hustle teaching painting to kids at a community center, about how she once tried to train her cat to walk on a leash and failed spectacularly. He told her vague truths about his old life, how the business got too big, how he lost track of who to trust, how the fall was quieter than expected but deeper than imagined. She never pushed for details, and he never offered lies. After their plates were cleared and the coffee cooled, Emily pulled a thin chain from around her neck. At the end was a small brass key. "My mama gave me this," she said. "It's not for anything real, just symbolic. She told me, keep this close, baby. It's to remind you your doors are always open for the right people, but don't let anyone make you feel like you have to unlock it for the wrong ones." Malcolm watched her roll the key between her fingers. "You think I'm one of the right ones?" "I think I want to find out." His throat tightened a little, and he nodded. "Me, too." They walked out together. The evening air had turned cool, the breeze carrying the scent of the nearby river and honeysuckle. Streetlights buzzed to life. Emily's car was parked under a flickering lamppost, an old Honda with more stickers than paint on the back bumper. She turned to him before getting in. "Thanks for tonight." "No," he said. "Thank you for seeing me." She smiled softer now. "Anytime, Malcolm." "Really?" Then she drove off, taillights disappearing into the dusk. Malcolm stood there for a long moment, hands in his jacket pockets. He felt human, level, like the noise had quieted just enough for him to breathe. Back in his apartment, he sat at the small desk by the window and pulled out an old leather-bound notebook, one he hadn't opened since long before the collapse. He flipped to a clean page, uncapped a pen, and began to write. "Her name is Emily William. She wears honesty like armor and kindness like perfume. I don't know what this is yet, but I know it feels real." He paused, then added, "And I don't want to ruin it with a lie." He closed the notebook and stared out the window as Charleston's lights blinked on one by one. He knew this couldn't last forever, not without the truth. But tonight, it wasn't about who he had been. It was about who he might become with her. 3 weeks passed. Malcolm found himself returning to the Langford Grand Hotel not as an executive in disguise, but as a man caught between two truths. By day, he walked the marble floors in his security uniform, clipboard in hand, invisible to the guests who rarely noticed the people holding the doors open for them. By night, he met Emily William at quiet diners along the waterfront, sometimes just sitting on a park bench, sharing coffee and stories neither had told anyone else in years. He hadn't told her who he was. Not yet. But every time she looked at him, not past him, every time she laughed at his dumb jokes or listened to the pauses between his words, it chipped away at the wall he had built after his fall from the pedestal of wealth and status. One evening, while patrolling the West Lobby, Malcolm spotted Victoria Langford gliding out of the elevator in a red power dress, flanked by a pair of assistants and a hotel manager clearly trying too hard. Her voice echoed down the corridor as she complained about lighting, the softness of the pillows, and the fact that the suite smelled like Florida. He stepped aside, hoping she wouldn't notice him, but she did. She stopped mid-sentence, narrowed her eyes, and tilted her head. "You still work here?" she asked, her tone laced with venom and confusion. "Yes, ma'am," he said evenly. "Huh?" She scanned him again, slower this time. "So, it wasn't a gimmick. You really are just a guard." "I am today," he said. "And I'm good at it." She scoffed. "Well, best of luck holding doors. I suppose someone has to do it." Then she walked off, the manager trailing like a loyal dog. Malcolm stood still for a moment, not angry, just tired. The world had a way of wrapping itself in arrogance, assuming what it didn't bother to ask. That night, he met Emily at a small street fair on the edge of town. Food trucks lined the park, and local musicians strummed under string lights hung between trees. Children ran barefoot through grass still warm from the afternoon sun, and older couples danced slowly to a cover of Stand By Me. Emily wore a navy sundress with sunflowers on the hem, and her hair was tied up messily like she didn't care how it looked because she didn't need to. "You look like summer," Malcolm said, handing her a lemonade. She grinned. "You look like you could use a nap." "I probably do." They walked the length of the fair, sampling cornbread and peach cobbler, watching kids hula hoop and neighbors greet each other like family. Malcolm couldn't remember the last time he had stood this close to joy and felt like he belonged in it. Emily stopped at a booth selling handmade wind chimes. She picked up one made of tiny silver keys. "Pretty," she said, running her fingers across the delicate pieces like secrets waiting to be told. Malcolm felt his stomach turn. Not from the food, but from the truth pressing against the back of his throat. "I have to tell you something," he said suddenly. Emily looked up, surprised by the shift in tone. "Okay," she said, setting the chime down. They stepped away from the booth toward a quiet patch of grass under a tree. "I haven't been entirely honest with you," he began, eyes fixed on the horizon. "About what I used to do." Emily nodded, encouraging him. "Okay, I wasn't just working in tech," he said. "I ran one of the largest tech firms in the Southeast, Reed Technologies." "That was me." Emily blinked. "Wait, the Reed Technologies?" He nodded. "That was my world until about a year ago. There was a scandal, personal and professional. I lost most of my board's trust. My fiancé left, my CFO betrayed me, and I walked away before they could fire me." Emily's expression didn't change the way he feared it would. She didn't pull back. She didn't scoff. She simply watched him, her eyes searching his. "So why the disguise?" she asked quietly. "Because I didn't trust anyone. I wanted to see if people could see me without the title, the suits, the headlines. If anyone could love the man, not the myth." Emily looked down at her hands, then back up at him. "And what did you think you'd find?" "I didn't know," Malcolm admitted. "But then I met you." She exhaled slowly. "And now you're afraid you've lied to me." "I did, and I'm sorry for that. But nothing I said about how I feel? None of that was a lie." Emily was silent for a long moment. Around them, the fair kept moving, laughter, music, the smell of funnel cake. But in that small pocket of stillness under the tree, something raw hung between them. "I wish you had told me sooner," she said softly. "I know, but I'm not angry," she added. You were trying to protect something fragile. I get that. He looked at her, stunned. But Malcolm, she continued, if you want to be with me, be with me. You have to let go of hiding. No more uniforms. No more half-truths. Oh, he nodded, feeling like something in him had cracked open. Deal, he whispered. She smiled, took his hand, and squeezed it. Also, she said, trying to lighten the moment, you owe me so much pie. He laughed. And this time, it wasn't cautious. It was full and real and free. As the sky deepened to violet and the first stars blinked to life, Malcolm Reed stood beside the woman who had unknowingly passed every test and realized that maybe, just maybe, the real test was his own ability to believe again. 2 days later, Emily stood behind the counter of the hotel café, wiping down a tray while the espresso machine hissed behind her. She hadn't seen Malcolm since the night at the fair. Not because she didn't want to, but because she needed time to breathe, time to think. The revelation that her favorite quiet man in a security uniform was actually Malcolm Reed had shaken something loose inside her. Not because of who he had been, but because he'd spent so long hiding it. She understood why. She even respected it. But the truth had cracked the steady ground they'd built together. Now she had to decide whether she could plant roots again on this new surface. Hey, came a familiar voice. She turned. Malcolm stood on the other side of the counter holding 2 coffees and wearing jeans and a button-down shirt. No uniform, no name tag, just him. You look different, Emily said. I feel different, he replied. Figured it was time to stop pretending. She set the tray down, wiped her hands, and nodded toward the side patio. Want to sit? They walked outside, settling into a small table shaded by a canvas umbrella. The breakfast crowd bustled just beyond the hedge, but here it felt quieter. He handed her one of the coffees. Extra cinnamon. I remembered. She took a sip. So, what happens now? Malcolm leaned back, eyes scanning the brick pathway. Now I stop hiding from you, from myself. From what I actually want. Emily raised an eyebrow. And what do you want? I want you, he said without pause. And not as some side note in my recovery. I want you at the center of whatever comes next. Her heart thudded, not from surprise, but from how much she had hoped he'd say that. Before she could answer, a shrill voice cut through the air behind them. Oh, look who crawled out of the shadows. Victoria Langford stood near the entrance to the patio, dressed in a silk pantsuit and holding an oversized handbag like it was a weapon. Her voice drew attention as always. Malcolm stood calmly. Good morning, Victoria. You always had a flair for theatrics. She sneered. The billionaire who plays poor. How noble. Emily stayed seated but watched closely. You do realize your little charade made you the laughingstock of half the Langford board, right? Victoria said. The security guard who moonlighted as a mogul. Cute trick. I didn't do it for laughs. Oh, I'm sure you probably did it to bait someone like her, she motioned toward Emily, dismissive. But don't worry, sweetheart, she added, turning her full attention on Emily now. Men like him, they always go back to their kind. The suits, the gala girls, the women who don't smell like fryer grease and work 15-hour shifts. Emily stood, eyes steady. You done? Victoria blinked, momentarily caught off guard. You're angry because he chose truth, and because you don't know how to exist without a spotlight. Victoria scoffed. Please, I was born in the spotlight. Emily stepped closer. Yeah, and somehow you still haven't figured out what to do with it. Gasps rippled from the guests nearby. Victoria's cheeks flushed a hard pink. Malcolm stepped between them, placing a calming hand on Emily's arm. Let it go. She stared Victoria down for a moment longer, then nodded. You're right. Victoria gave one last tight smile, turned, and strutted away, but not before Malcolm called after her. Victoria, she turned halfway. Smug. Next time you see someone in uniform, maybe try looking them in the eye. She didn't reply. Later that afternoon, word of the confrontation spread through the hotel like spilled wine. Guests whispered. Employees nodded to Emily with subtle respect. Even the general manager, who'd always looked through her rather than at her, gave her a small nod at the elevator. But the biggest shift came when Malcolm approached Emily's locker during her break. "I want you to meet someone," he said. "Now." He smiled. "Now." They drove across town to a modest but elegant community center tucked between two churches and a park. Children ran in and out of the front doors, and a woman in scrubs waved to Malcolm as he stepped out of the car. Inside, the smell of finger paint and floor polish filled the halls. Malcolm led her to a room in the back, a large studio space with blank canvases, shelves of supplies, and soft lighting. "I funded this place 4 years ago," he said. "For creative programs in neighborhoods that don't get enough of anything." Emily looked around. "It's beautiful. I haven't stepped foot in here since the scandal. But this is what I miss. This is what I want to return to." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. "It's a proposal. I've been working on something, an initiative to pair young artists with mentors, provide grants, exhibitions, scholarships, and I want you involved." Emily stared at him, stunned. "You're the most grounded person I know," he continued. "You understand what art can do when you don't have anything else. You lived it, taught it. You still do. This doesn't work without you." Tears burned the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them away. "You're serious?" "I've never been more." She took the paper slowly, holding it like something fragile. "You know," she whispered, "I came into your life thinking you were just a man who'd been knocked down." "I was," Malcolm replied. "But you were the reason I stood back up." In that moment, under the soft glow of a room meant for second chances, Emily William realized she hadn't just met a man with secrets. She'd met a man who wanted to build something better together. The next few weeks moved quietly but purposefully. Word of Malcolm's new project spread through small press circles. Nothing flashy, just quiet ripples across community boards, local radio mentions, and the occasional city council smile. The press hadn't caught on yet, and that was exactly how he wanted it. For now, it was just him, a few trusted hands, and Emily. Most mornings they met at the community center, her hair pulled into a messy bun, sleeves rolled up, coffee in one hand and a clipboard in the other. He was always there first, unlocking the doors, sweeping the front walk like a man who knew the value of small beginnings. "I swear you get here earlier than the janitor," Emily said one day, pushing through the front doors with 2 egg and cheese biscuits. Malcolm shrugged, smiling. "You can't ask others to build if you're not willing to pick up the hammer." She handed him a biscuit. "That's either incredibly wise or incredibly corny." "Both," he said. "That's how you know it's real." They worked through color palettes, paint shipments, outreach letters, and staff interviews. But between the lines, between paint spills and deep laughs and shared silence, something unspoken kept growing. Trust, comfort, the kind of closeness that didn't ask for permission, just quietly settled in until one morning when Malcolm arrived to find the front door already open. Emily stood inside talking to a young woman, early 20s, dressed in jeans with frayed cuffs, a toddler on her hip, and a weariness that age couldn't explain. "This is Kesha," Emily said when Malcolm approached. "She's been looking for a place to take her little boy while she finishes her GED." Kesha looked unsure, one hand patting her son's back. "I just thought maybe he could sit in during one of the art sessions. He loves to draw." Malcolm knelt down to the little boy's level. "What's your name, champ?" "Micah," the boy whispered. "Well, Micah, we've got paper, paint, crayons, and a lot of windows we haven't drawn on yet. You in?" Ma grinned, nodding hard. Kesha looked at Emily. He's never smiled like that for a stranger. Emily smiled back. He's not a stranger. Not anymore. That afternoon, Malcolm watched Emily teach Micah how to mix colors. Her fingers stained blue and gold as she let him smear his palms across the canvas. It wasn't structured or neat, but it was joyful, loud, bright joy. After the class, when the room had emptied and sunlight stretched long across the hardwood floor, Malcolm spoke softly. I want more of this, he said. Emily looked up from the brushes she was rinsing. You've got it. No. He stepped closer. I mean more of you. Not just here. In my life beyond these walls. Emily dried her hands on a towel, her smile cautious. Malcolm, I care about what we're building, about what we're becoming. But this is real life now. You're not hiding. And I'm not just the girl who brought you coffee. I know that, he said. And I don't want you to be. I want you to be my partner in everything. Her eyes searched his. You're not saying that because you feel you owe me something. He shook his head. I'm saying it because I want to wake up beside someone who doesn't need me to be a billionaire, who saw me when no one else did. She stepped into him, resting her forehead against his. That's a dangerous kind of love. I'm willing to risk it, he whispered. And for the first time since the day of the cafe incident, Emily kissed him, not as a thank you, not as an apology, but as a woman saying yes without words. That night, Malcolm received a text from his assistant. Victoria Langford is trying to buy out 3 of the board members for the foundation project. You may want to respond. He didn't show it to Emily. Instead, he stood on the balcony of his apartment, phone in hand, thinking it wasn't surprising. Victoria had always played power like chess, silently, strategically, mercilessly. But now she wasn't just attacking his image. She was targeting the one thing that gave him peace again. The next morning, Malcolm met with his legal advisor. The man laid out options, press releases, cease and desist notices, even a potential lawsuit. But Malcolm didn't want a legal battle. He wanted truth. So, he made a decision. 3 days later, Malcolm walked into the largest ballroom at the Langford Hotel, Victoria's crown jewel venue. Dozens of reporters turned their cameras toward him. Invitations had been sent anonymously to every local news outlet and non-profit leader. No one knew why until now. He stepped onto the small stage, took a breath, and began. I once thought power came from money, position, and silence. I was wrong. True power comes from choosing honesty when deceit is easier. From choosing people who see through you and still stay. The room quieted. I pretended to be someone else. Yes, but not to deceive. I did it to learn who still values kindness over credit scores. And I found her. He looked directly at Emily standing near the back, hands clenched. She showed me that dignity doesn't wear designer shoes. That honor doesn't come with headlines. That healing starts in silence but ends in love. Reporters scribbled, cameras flashed. I will not sell the foundation. I will not let those who use charity as a brand destroy what is being built from truth. And to anyone trying to dismantle this from the inside, know this. You'll have to go through me, and I don't disappear anymore. The room erupted, some in applause, some in shock. But Emily, she just smiled because the man standing on stage wasn't the Malcolm Reed the world remembered. He was better, and he was finally home. The fallout came fast. Within 24 hours of Malcolm's public statement, the press swarmed. Headlines ranged from disgraced billionaire resurfaces with new mission to security guard turned savior, Reed's return to power. For the first time in months, Malcolm wasn't being talked about as a failure, but as a man who chose dignity over damage control. Emily, meanwhile, found herself unexpectedly in the spotlight. Reporters waited outside the community center. Parents whispered when she walked into grocery stores. Her photo, taken from that very night, standing quietly in the back of the ballroom, began making rounds with captions like, "The waitress who saw the man before the money." Malcolm tried to shield her from it, but Emily wasn't one to be hidden. "Let them talk," she said, sliding a cup of coffee across the table to him one morning. "You didn't build this for silence. Neither did I." Still, the pressure mounted. Victoria Langford, embarrassed by the exposure, retaliated through subtle channels, cutting off supply deals, pulling strings with local politicians, even hosting her own faux charity gala across town on the same weekend Malcolm had planned the foundation's official launch event. And worse, 3 of the foundation's early board members, lured by Langford's promises, resigned within a week. "They think she's safer," Malcolm told Emily, pacing the rooftop of the center one night. Less complicated. She's certainly less honest, Emily replied, sitting cross-legged on the gravel, her arms tucked inside her coat. He stopped pacing. Maybe I moved too fast. No, she said firmly. You moved when it mattered. You just didn't expect the blowback to feel this personal. He sat beside her. Everything feels personal now. Emily looked out at the city lights. That's because you finally started fighting for something that's yours. Not your company, not your image, but your truth. That makes every punch land a little deeper. He turned to her. What if I can't protect it? She reached over, threading her fingers through his. Then we rebuild. Again and again, as many times as it takes. Malcolm didn't reply. He didn't need to. The launch day arrived like a sunrise after a storm, unexpectedly bright. The community center had been transformed. Banners hung from balconies. A jazz trio played near the steps, and the air buzzed with the laughter of children running through art exhibits and storytelling booths. The foundation's name, Second Light, glowed across the entrance in golden script. People showed up, not just press, but real families, students, veterans, teachers, people who remembered Malcolm Reed as a man of power and were curious to see who he was now. But the real surprise came at noon. A black SUV pulled up. Out stepped Harold Brennan, CEO of the largest logistics firm on the East Coast, flanked by his assistant and a man in a wheelchair. Malcolm immediately recognized Paul Kendrick, a formerly homeless veteran whose story had once headlined national news. They approached Malcolm with quiet confidence. You built this, Harold said, shaking his hand. Not to reclaim power, but to give it away. I'd like to invest in that. Paul added, a lot of men say they care about second chances. You're one of the few that actually do something about it. In front of the gathered crowd, Harold handed Malcolm a signed agreement, full logistic support for Second Light's national expansion. Emily watched from the stairs, hands over her mouth, her eyes filling. She didn't need to hear the words. She felt the shift. This wasn't just a win. This was a turning point. As the sun dipped low, Malcolm took the stage for a closing speech. He kept it short. I once believed legacy came from what you leave behind. But now I know it's about who you bring forward with you. He stepped down, reaching for Emily's hand as the crowd clapped. But behind the cheers and camera flashes, Malcolm spotted a figure at the edge of the courtyard. Victoria Langford. She wasn't alone. Her arms were crossed, her smile brittle. Beside her stood another man, a council member known for voting where the money pointed. Emily followed Malcolm's gaze. She won't stop, will she? No, Malcolm murmured. But neither will we. That night, after the last guest had gone and the lights had dimmed, Malcolm and Emily stood alone in the main hall. He took her hands, his thumbs brushing her knuckles. We're not just surviving anymore, he said. We're building. She leaned into him, resting her head on his chest. That's the scariest part. He nodded. And the best. The world outside would keep spinning, press, politics, power plays. But inside these walls, something had shifted. Something more lasting than headlines. A truth had been born. And it had a name, Second Light. The first threat came as an email. No name. Just a message. Simple, cold. You don't belong in this world anymore. Walk away or we'll drag you. Malcolm sat alone in his office at the community center, rereading the message for the 5th time. The silence around him was heavy, broken only by the hum of the old ceiling fan. He didn't flinch, but he didn't delete the message either. Emily walked in moments later, balancing a tray of takeout and a tired smile. You skipped dinner again, she said, placing the food down. He turned the screen toward her. This came in 20 minutes ago. She read it quietly, then looked up, jaw tight. Langford. She wouldn't send it herself. She's too careful. But it's her style. Cracks in the dark. Emily crossed her arms. We go to the police. Malcolm shook his head. Not yet. I don't want this becoming a circus. Not until we know more. He watched her eyes. The way she didn't blink for a few seconds. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out the small brass key she always wore. You told me the first time you saw this, it meant something. She said it still does. But now it's not just a reminder to protect myself. It's to remind me to stand with the people I believe in. He stood up and took her hand. I'll be careful. I promise. Oh. The next morning, Malcolm made a call to an old contact, Briggs Jefferson, a former Marine and one of the few people Malcolm had trusted during his early business days. Briggs now ran a small, low-profile security consultancy out of Savannah. Within hours, Briggs was at the center, tall, broad, with a voice like gravel and eyes that missed nothing. You stirred the hornet's nest, huh? Briggs said, looking over the email. I didn't stir it. I replaced it with a garden, Malcolm replied. Briggs smirked. You always did have a poetic way of getting yourself into trouble. They reviewed the building's security footage, tightened up access points, and created a protocol for staff and volunteers. Briggs also brought in a woman named Carla, a tech expert who used to work cyber crime cases for the FBI. She'll trace where that email came from, Briggs said. And if it leads back to Langford's camp, you'll have more than suspicion, you'll have leverage. But even with protections in place, tension mounted. A week later, Malcolm's car tires were slashed. Then came the calls, anonymous, always silent, always late at night. Emily noticed the lines under his eyes deepening. The silence between his words growing heavier. But he never stopped showing up, never stopped helping the kids, shaking hands, reading proposals, listening to stories, and still he never missed a Friday lunch with Emily at the pie shop. It was during one of those lunches that everything changed. Briggs walked in unannounced, his face tight. He waited until their waitress stepped away, then leaned in. We got the trace back, he said. To Langford. No, he said slowly. Worse. One of your own board members. Michael Avery. Malcolm froze. That's impossible. Avery's been with me since the beginning. Exactly, which made it easier for him to feed her information, emails, passwords, planning documents. He's been sabotaging you from the inside. Emily's lips parted in disbelief. Why? Briggs shrugged. Money? Pride? Maybe both. Malcolm sat back in the booth. His chest felt hollow. Emily reached for his hand. We expose him now. But Malcolm didn't move. He knows the foundation inside out, he said quietly. If I call him out publicly, it'll create chaos. If I stay quiet, he keeps bleeding us from within. Briggs said there's a third option. Trap him. Later that night, under the cover of a fake late-night meeting, Briggs and Carla set up surveillance in the conference room. Malcolm sent Avery an email asking to meet and discuss a shift in leadership roles. The bait was subtle but loaded. Avery arrived right on time, smug and sharp in a navy suit, holding a leather folder and wearing the confidence of someone who thought he'd already won. They sat. Malcolm played it smooth, casual. I've been thinking about stepping back, he said. I want someone I trust to take more of the front-facing duties. Avery leaned forward. I'd be honored. And I was wondering, Malcolm continued, if there's anything you'd need from me to make that process easier. Avery smiled. Well, if I had more control over donor access, that would certainly streamline things. That was the line they needed. It was all recorded. The next morning, Malcolm held a private board meeting with Briggs and Carla present. They played the footage. No one spoke. No one dared defend Avery. He was removed immediately, and a formal legal complaint was filed. Langford, hearing the news, didn't make another move, not publicly. But the damage was already done. Malcolm had proved that Second Light wasn't just about charity. It was about integrity. And no amount of threats could touch that anymore. That night, Emily and Malcolm sat again on the rooftop, their usual spot for quiet after the storms. "Do you ever think about what your life would be like if you never came to that first date?" she asked. "All the time," he said. "And every time I do, I remember one thing." "What's that?" "That sometimes the worst days are what bring you the best people." She leaned into him, and for the first time in a long time, the night felt safe. 6 months later, the same garden café where everything began buzzed with energy, but this time for a celebration. Tables were arranged under twinkling string lights. An old jazz band played softly in the corner. Laughter floated through the air like music itself. The banner overhead read, "Second Light Expansion, Community First, Always." Malcolm stood at the edge of the courtyard in a tailored gray suit, a far cry from the work-worn uniform he had once worn. Yet something in his eyes was still the same, a calm dignity, a weight that knew how to carry other people's burdens. Emily joined him, her green dress flowing softly in the breeze. She handed him a glass of sparkling cider and smiled. "You clean up well." He chuckled. "And you still look at me like I matter." "You do." They stood together watching the crowd. Former foster kids Malcolm had helped were now college students. Single moms who once came for food assistance now ran booths showcasing their small businesses. The new wing of the community center gleamed in the background, built from donations that poured in after the story of the sabotage went public. News outlets had tried to turn Malcolm into a hero. He turned them down, every single one except one interview with the local paper where he gave credit to the volunteers, to Emily, to every name that never made headlines. The evening carried on, voices rising with joy, children chasing each other past tables. Then someone clinked a glass at the center stage. Malcolm and Emily turned. It was Briggs, surprisingly in a sport coat that almost fit him. He cleared his throat, slightly awkward. "I'm not a speech guy, but tonight ain't about polish, it's about grit. And there's no one with more grit and more grace than Malcolm Reed." Applause. Briggs continued, 6 months ago, this place almost folded. You all remember, and we would have if it weren't for one man who refused to bend even when the system wanted him gone. He didn't fight fire with fire. He fought it with light. And because of that, Second Light stayed lit. Laughter, claps, some people even stood. Malcolm stepped forward, adjusting the mic. He looked over the sea of faces, old, young, every color and walk of life. Then his eyes met Emily's. She gave him a small nod. He began, voice steady. "When I came here, I didn't expect to stay. I was just a man trying to keep a promise, one that had nothing to do with business and everything to do with integrity." The crowd hushed. "But then I met people who reminded me what purpose feels like, what community tastes like, and what hope looks like when it brings you coffee after your worst day and doesn't expect you to smile right away." The crowd chuckled softly. "I'm not a billionaire. Not anymore. And I don't miss it because I've learned something better. True wealth isn't measured in dollars or square footage. It's measured in names you remember, meals you share, lives you touch without needing thanks." He paused, emotions swelling at the corners of his voice. "And to the woman who saw me that first day when all I had left was my word, I say this. You were right. A promise is still a promise. But love is the one you choose to keep making." Emily's hand covered her mouth as her eyes shimmered. Applause thundered. Some guests stood, some wiping away tears. After the ceremony, as the night grew softer, Emily and Malcolm slipped away to the back steps of the center where the air was quieter, the stars clearer. He handed her a small velvet box. She didn't open it at first. "Are you sure?" she whispered. "I've never been more," he said. "And I don't need a grand proposal, Emily. I just want something real, something like us." She opened it. Inside was a simple silver ring, modest in size, but engraved with a phrase only she would understand. "You saw me." Emily leaned into him, tears spilling over as she whispered, "And I'll keep seeing you." Every day, they stayed there under the stars, wrapped not just in each other's arms, but in something stronger. A shared belief that even in a world full of masks, money, and broken promises, kindness could still rewrite everything. And just beyond the community gates, a new family drove by slowly. Windows rolled down. A little boy in the back seat pointed toward the couple. "Mom," he said. "Is that the guy from the news?" His mother smiled. "No, honey. That's the man who made our neighborhood safe again." And the car moved on into the quiet streets of a town that still believed in second chances. Final note from BUP Stories: thank you for watching. Subscribe for more heartwarming stories.